Yeah, so we now look at the role of agriculture in economic development, right? The background. We can understand that some sectors were given more priority in Zambia than agriculture sector, such as mining, manufacturing. You'll understand that manufacturing and mining, basically, these are some of the main sectors that got most of our attention. Um, it was assumed that the sector would increase without much attention or investment. So this made agriculture industry to grow slowly. Okay, yeah. Let's now quickly look at the stages of agriculture sector in development. So you understand that the development was segmented into three stages. The first stage being traditional, the second stage being labor intensive, and the third stage being dynamic or capital intensive. So let's start with the traditional stage. During the traditional stage, this is what happened. Agriculture sector constituted a large portion of the economy. So the growth was just between -1 and 1. Yeah. So what are some of the things that would happen? The inputs in production would include capital basically was scarce. Capital was scarce relatively expensive. Okay, capital was scarce and relatively expensive. Production was labor intensive during the first stage. Yeah, production was basically labor intensive, but capital was relatively scarce and expensive. And again, you learn that land was abundant, but the population was very small. Yeah, that's why you think land was abundant, because basically the population was small. But with passage of time, you'll understand that there was still low technology in stage one, but as time went on, the population started growing. Then land started slowly become scarce, and demand for agricultural import started increasing, because as the population size increases, you find that even people would demand a lot of things so that they can actually consume, right? Because people cannot be there without consumption. Traditional or labor intensive, or the passings, first. The second stage. There was now improvement in technology through learning by doing and imported knowledge. So knowledge was basically imported, and people started learning by doing. So the following are the things that you notice under here. Number one, innovation and increased usage of capital due to scarce of land was noticed and was experienced during the labor intensive. So there was much of innovation, increased usage of capital in the second stage. Okay. Technology and institutional changes gathered momentum. Okay, gathered momentum. There was increased productivity and the output. So in the second stage, there was the innovation and increased usage of capital, and then land starts becoming, scarce. Technology and institutional changes gather momentum. There is increased productivity and output in the second stage. But now let's observe what happens in the third stage, which is basically the dynamic or capital intensive stage. Here now we experience different changes, right? Number one, technology has taken center stage. In the second stage, it was gathering momentum. Now it has taken center stage. The emphasis on growing food and contributing to economic development in the third stage. And there is an increase in demand for what? For labor. So there is an increase in the demand for labor. Labor becomes relatively expensive. Capital now seems cheap again. Okay, capital seems cheaper in the third stage. Labor saving technologies introduced, and production slowly is slowly becoming what? Capital intensive in the third stage. What are some of the critics of this model now? The model, number one, too historical description. When you look at this, kind of describing things, it's just too historical. Okay, and again, there is too much little or basically maybe no analytical value for policy guidance. Okay, so you understand that the model does not, explain anything about a political guidance or policy guidance. What are some of the changes that, policy evolution would, have contributed? Now, but again, on the other hand, we can think was good because, despite being too historical, having no analytical value for policy guidance, it was still useful as it aids in understanding technological change and price of labor relative to capital. We understood the price of labor relative to capital. Still useful in understanding the value of technology, price of labor. What are some of the forward linkages now? Linkages are very forward, are very important. Number one, there was an increase in food or agricultural produce for the urban or industrialized sectors. Again, it contributes to consumption and demand for goods and services produced from other sectors. So there is an increase in the demand. Okay. There is an increase. Let's say, there is an increase in the food or agricultural produce that is being produced for urban or industrialized sectors. Okay. It provides productive work for the rapidly increasing rural population. So there is productive work for the rapidly increasing rural population. The produce for export as a source of foreign exchange. Again, these are some of the forward linkages. But what are some of the backward linkages? Improved imports, equipment, demand of output. Let's look at some of the causes and consequences of agricultural stagnation. What are some of the causes? What could be some of the consequences of agricultural stagnation? Number one, performs poorly relative to secondary and tertiary, industries in many, lower developing countries. Okay. There are some consequences. You perform poorly, okay, relative to secondary and tertiary industries. So these are some of the consequences. It contributes to GDP remains still yet it employs the largest portion of the country's labor. What we are saying is that the contribution of agriculture is really minimal, but it employs, the largest portion of the country's labor. So most of the larger portion of the country's labor is employed in agriculture sector. But when you look at the GDP again, the contribution of agriculture sector is relatively small. Labor is again relatively less productive due to low level of capitalization. These are some of the challenges that you basically find. So agriculture sector in Zambia, due to the structure of economies, a major difference between developing countries and developed countries is that a large number of people in developing countries are employed in the agriculture sector. This is what usually happens. Let's look at the classification of agriculture policy instrument. The classification of the agricultural policy instrument. Number one, policy. A policy is a set of objectives, about what you want to achieve, supported by instruments for achieving the objectives and rules for applying these instruments. So basically, a set of objectives about what you want to achieve, that is supported by instruments for achieving the objectives and the rules for applying these instruments is what is called a policy. Let's look at the farm level now. Let's try to look at this. So you find that instruments applied at the farm level permit the amount and the type of economic activity in farming and to be adjusted relative to the levels which would be dictated by competitive pressure from national and international markets. Domestic market level, set marketing boards can use their powers to raise or lower prices received by farmers. This is domestic market level. And they can be used as a vehicle to pass subsidies to consumers, thus raising consumption. Okay. Then when you look at the frontier level instrument, the frontier level instrument will alter the relationship between the domestic and the international market, affecting the terms of trade and the volume of trade flows. That is to say, the import tariffs on specific crops to promote the local production. Now, the impact of the macroeconomic policies on agriculture. These were designed, they were actually designed